Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. The twin sons of Zephyr beat down on the irradiated dunes, baking the crimson sand until the surface cracked and hissed. Heat waves distorted the horizon, creating a suffocating mirage that offered no promise of salvation. Only an endless ocean of dust. Emily Ross dragged her heavy, reinforced boots across the steep ridge. As a biomedical engineer from Earth, she was accustomed to surviving in hostile environments. But this particular wasteland was a completely different kind of hell. She was here wandering the treacherous plains, searching for rare neuroconductive ores, playing the role of a desperate scavenger in a forgotten and unforgiving corner of the galaxy. Her environmental suit beeped a low, rhythmic warning, indicating her hydration levels were dropping fast. The temperature outside the suit had reached 120 degrees, and the radiation counters were ticking aggressively. The wind carried a toxic sting, scraping against her visor with microscopic grains of radioactive glass. She knew she had to find shelter soon, but her sensors had picked up a faint, anomalous energy signature just over the next dune. Suddenly, a deep hum vibrated through the ground beneath her feet, forcing Emily to drop to her knees. She slid behind a jagged outcropping of black shale and carefully peered over the sharp edge. 3 sleek, obsidian hovercrafts bearing the intricate, glowing crest of the Zephyr royal family glided silently above the dunes. They were flawless, beautiful machines, utterly detached from the grime and brutal decay of the planet's surface. The repulsor engines flared bright blue, kicking up a massive cloud of red dust. And then the convoys shot forward. They disappeared into the distorted, hazy skyline within seconds, leaving nothing but an echoing roar in their wake. Emily waited patiently for the dust to settle. That was when she saw it. A solitary, dark figure lay crumpled on the scorching sand, left behind in the violent wake of the royal departure. Emily hesitated for only a fraction of a second before scrambling down the steep face of the dune. The heat radiating from the ground was intense enough to melt standard polymer, but her heavy boots held firm. As she drew closer, the tragic details of the discarded figure became painfully clear. It was a Zephyrian woman, dressed in the tattered, dirt-stained remains of what was once ceremonial silk. The woman lay flat on her back, her breathing shallow and ragged. Her legs were completely motionless, twisted at an unnatural, helpless angle. Emily instantly recognized the distinctive bioneural ports grafted along the back of the woman's neck. They were the undeniable, permanent mark of high-born nobility. This was Vale, the eldest and fully grown daughter of the ruthless Baron Kalen. Rumors of the crippled princess had reached even the deepest, darkest black market trading posts where Emily usually operated. The ruling class considered Vale a biological failure. She was a royal descendant, whose nervous system was judged to be utterly paralyzed, rendering her entirely unable to connect to the massive planetary psychic network that her tyrant father controlled. Vale opened her eyes slowly. They were a piercing, luminescent silver, filled with a complex mixture of physical agony and unbroken, fierce pride. She stared directly at the human standing over her, her gaze hardening into sharp daggers despite her fatal condition. "Do not touch me, scavenger," Vale whispered. Her voice was dry and rasping, sounding like 2 rough stones grating together in the desert heat. "I do not need your filthy hands on me. Leave me to the sands." Emily knelt firmly beside her, completely ignoring the venom in the alien woman's tone. She reached for the side pouch of her utility belt, pulling out a heavy, blocky medical scanner of Earth design. It severely lacked the elegant, seamless bio-integration of Zephyrian technology, but it was highly reliable. You have about 30 minutes before your internal organs begin to boil from the inside out, Emily said, her voice flat, calm, and deeply pragmatic. Save your breath for surviving. I said leave me, Vale commanded, struggling weakly to turn her head away from the human device. My father determined I am scrap, a defective vessel unfit for the royal mind. I will die here with the dignity of my pure bloodline, not as a pathetic charity case for a wandering human. Dignity does not keep your heart beating, Emily muttered. She forcefully pressed the metal scanner against the base of Vale's skull, placing it right over the highest, thickest neural port. The machine hummed loudly, processing the incredibly complex biological data. Lines of bright green text scrolled rapidly across the small, cracked screen. Emily frowned deeply, tapping the side of the device with her knuckle to ensure it was reading the data correctly. The results were absolutely astonishing. Vale's nervous system was not degraded at all. The internal pathways were incredibly dense, glowing with a latent, raw energy that the crude scanner could barely manage to quantify. The paralysis was not a natural defect or a genetic failure. It was a massive, artificial blockade. The advanced royal technology grafted forcefully into her spine was actively suppressing an evolutionary neural structure that was simply too powerful, too wild, and too different for their standard control network to comprehend. They had not abandoned a useless cripple. They had locked away a biological phenomenon. You are not broken, Emily said, looking directly and intensely into Vale's silver eyes. They severed your connections on purpose. Your biology is fighting their hardware, and the hardware is currently winning. Vale blinked rapidly, a sudden flicker of deep confusion breaking through her stoic, prideful mask, before she could even begin to process the magnitude of the human's revelation. A low, terrifying rumble echoed across the vast desert floor. Emily snapped her head up. The distant horizon had turned a bruised, violent purple. A massive hyperstorm was gathering. It was a churning, towering wall of radioactive sand and deadly electromagnetic lightning moving toward their exact position at terrifying speed. Staying out in the open meant absolute, certain death. We are out of time, Emily declared sharply. She securely fastened her heavy medical kit back onto her belt, then leaned down and grabbed Vale firmly by the arms. What are you doing? Vale demanded, gasping in sharp pain as her lifeless, heavy lower body was dragged across the rough sand. I am taking you with me. Emily grunted, hauling the tall, dense alien woman onto her own back. The physical weight was tremendous, straining the mechanical servos in Emily's suit to their maximum operational capacity. Hold on to my shoulders if you actually want to live. Every single step forward became a brutal battle against gravity and the shifting, sinking dunes. Emily locked her jaw, focusing her entire, undivided will on the jagged, dark silhouette of the crystal stone forest located 2 miles away. The dense crystal formations would violently disrupt the incoming storm's electromagnetic fury and provide them with the only available shelter. The wind began to howl fiercely, whipping the crimson sand into a chaotic frenzy that battered against their bodies like solid physical blows. Vale remained completely silent, her thin arms weakly draped over the human engineer. Her fierce, stubborn pride had finally given way to the sheer, primal will to survive. Together, they plunged forward into the blinding dust, leaving the deadly dunes behind them to seek refuge in the jagged rocks. Far away from the howling dust, inside the gleaming zenith of the Capitol spire, the absolute silence of the throne room was broken by a sudden, jarring disconnection. Baron Kalin sat rigid upon his bio-organic throne, his mind usually expanding across the vast planetary psychic network, like an omnipotent spider on a web. But a tiny, insignificant node had just vanished. The biological transmitter permanently embedded in his disgraced daughter had gone completely silent. Someone had forcibly deactivated it. Kalen did not feel the slightest pang of parental concern. He felt only the icy, calculating fury of a tyrant whose flawless reputation was suddenly threatened. The ruling elite could never know that a low-born scavenger had tampered with royal property. He raised a massive, armored hand, immediately summoning his elite obsidian trackers. His orders were absolute and completely devoid of mercy. Find the anomaly. Execute the defective offspring. Erase the human. Leave zero evidence behind. Miles below that pristine tower, the reality of survival was a gritty, desperate struggle. Deep inside the crystal forest, the deafening roar of the hyperstorm was reduced to a haunting, hollow echo. The labyrinth of jagged amethyst and quartz formations twisted endlessly into the dark. Emily carried Vielle through the narrow ravines, her muscles burning with intense lactic acid buildup after walking for almost 2 hours straight. This was the perfect hiding spot. The natural magnetic fields radiating from the massive crystal pillars aggressively scrambled any advanced thermal or biological tracking sensors. For now, they were practically invisible. Emily finally found a small, sheltered alcove beneath a massive overhang of green quartz. She gently lowered Vielle to the hard stone floor, collapsing heavily beside her to catch her own breath. The alien woman leaned against the cold crystal, her silver eyes devoid of their former fiery pride. Now, they only reflected a profound, suffocating despair. Vielle looked down at her motionless legs, her hands gripping the tattered silk of her dress until her knuckles turned white. "You are wasting your energy," Vielle said, her voice echoing softly in the cavern. "I am nothing but dead weight. I cannot fight, I cannot run, even if we survive the storm. My father will send the trackers. They are shadows that never miss their mark. Why are you risking your own survival for a crippled alien you do not even know?" Emily did not look up immediately. She was busy disassembling a spare plasma cartridge from her belt, stripping the highly explosive core with precise, practiced movements. "I know exactly what it feels like to be treated as disposable," Emily replied coldly, her hands never stopping their work. 4 years ago, I was the lead engineer for an earth mining conglomerate. We found a valley on this planet filled with a unique, sentient fungal network. It was beautiful. My corporate overseers ordered me to flood the entire valley with corrosive acid just to extract the raw lithium underneath. I refused the order. Emily paused, finally looking up to meet Vielle's gaze. The human's eyes were hardened by years of surviving the consequences of that choice. "They stripped my rank," Emily continued, her tone completely devoid of self-pity. "They took my clearance, dumped me on this radiation-soaked rock with exactly 3 days of rations, and flew away. To them, my life was just a negative line on a financial spreadsheet. I made a promise to myself that day. I would never become like them. I despise anyone who treats living, breathing beings like garbage to be thrown away. Your father threw you away. That makes him my enemy too." Before Vielle could formulate a response, the ambient light in the cave shifted. A faint, unnatural hum vibrated through the crystal walls. Emily instantly dropped the stripped cartridge and grabbed her heavy pulse rifle. The enemy had found them faster than she anticipated. The trackers did not rely entirely on sensors. They hunted by reading the microscopic disturbances in the dust. 3 sleek, armored figures descended silently from the upper ridges of the cavern. They moved like liquid darkness, their weapons humming with lethal intent. But Emily had not chosen this specific alcove by accident. It was a tactical bottleneck. As the first tracker lunged forward, his heavy foot severed a nearly invisible tripwire Emily had strung across the entrance. The improvised thermal charge detonated with a blinding flash. The explosion shattered the overhang, sending a brutal rain of razor-sharp crystal shards plummeting downward. The lead tracker was crushed instantly beneath a massive boulder of quartz. The remaining two scattered, raising their rifles and firing a relentless barrage of plasma bolts. Emily dove behind a thick stalagmite, returning fire. The cavern erupted into a chaotic, blinding crossfire of blue and red energy. Emily knew she was outgunned. She needed to close the distance. She rolled out from cover, firing wildly to suppress one enemy while sprinting toward the other. But she miscalculated the tracker's speed. The assassin pivoted, leveling a heavy disruptor cannon directly at her chest. Emily braced for the fatal impact. The tracker fired. However, the shot went slightly wide, striking the crystalline wall directly behind Vale. The weapon did not fire plasma. It fired a concentrated electromagnetic pulse designed to fry nervous systems. The massive shockwave of raw energy washed completely over the crippled alien woman. Emily screamed Vale's name, expecting to see the woman's heart stop. Instead, the impossible happened. The intense electromagnetic shock did not kill Vale. It acted like a massive defibrillator, violently jump-starting the suppressed, dormant pathways within her spine. In a fraction of a second, Vale gasped. Her eyes erupted with a blinding, incandescent silver light. She instinctively threw her hands forward. A solid, shimmering dome of pure kinetic energy manifested out of thin air, completely enveloping both her and Emily. The secondary blast from the tracker's weapon slammed into the shield and harmlessly dissipated into a shower of sparks. The assassins froze in absolute shock, their combat protocols completely failing to compute the sudden appearance of a psychic barrier from a known paralytic. Emily did not hesitate, taking advantage of their confusion. She raised her rifle and fired 2 precise shots, dropping both trackers to the cavern floor. Silence aggressively returned to the cave, broken only by the heavy, ragged breathing of the 2 women. The energy dome slowly dissolved, fading back into Vale's skin. Vale stared at her own trembling hands, her face a mask of total disbelief. She could feel a faint, terrifyingly powerful pulse traveling down her spine, reaching all the way to her toes. Emily slowly lowered her weapon. Walking over to the alien woman, the human engineer looked at the scorched wall, then at Vale. The pieces of the biological puzzle finally slammed into place. "Your paralysis," Emily whispered, her mind racing with the scientific implications. It was never a defect. Kalen's planetary network is a psychic parasite. If you had connected to it, his mind would have consumed yours. Your body knew that. Your advanced nervous system intentionally severed its own motor functions to build an impenetrable firewall against his manipulation. You are not broken. You are immune. Vale looked up, the crushing weight of her lifelong despair shattering into a million pieces. She was not the royal family's greatest failure. She was their ultimate, biological countermeasure. And now, thanks to the human who refused to let her die, the firewall was finally awake. Vale's mind was fixated on something far deeper than the recent ambush. The electromagnetic pulse had unlocked fragments of ancestral memory buried deep within her DNA, guided by these faint, echoing whispers. She directed Emily through the winding subterranean fissures. For exactly 6 hours, they descended, leaving the barren crystal caves far behind. The temperature cooled rapidly, and the jagged rocks gradually smoothed out into intricate, naturally formed geometric tunnels. They were entering the electromagnetic core archive. It was a breathtaking sanctuary hidden beneath the planetary crust. Unlike the brutal and synthetic bioarchitecture of the surface capital, this place was a pure testament to a forgotten era. Massive intertwining roots of subterranean flora pulsed with a soft bioluminescent blue light, seamlessly woven into pillars of conductive gold and silver ores. The ancient scifi species had not conquered nature to dominate it. Instead, They had engineered themselves to become a harmonious extension of it. The cavern breathed. It felt alive, radiating a gentle warmth that stood in stark contrast to the sterile, parasitic network controlled by the Baron on the surface. At the absolute center of the grand chamber stood the primary terminal, a towering crystalline monolith humming with the combined knowledge of an entire lost civilization. Vale stared up at it, her silver eyes reflecting the ancient light. She knew instinctively that her awakened neural pathways held the key to unlocking the archive, but her physical body still could not bridge the massive gap. That was where human ingenuity came into play. Emily quickly unpacked her remaining engineering gear. She stripped the heavy copper wiring from the downed tracker's weapons and spliced them directly into her Earth-made diagnostic computer. With surgical precision, she bypassed the monolith's organic security layers, creating a crude but highly functional peripheral bridge. "This is going to hurt," Emily warned, securing the makeshift neural nodes to the base of Vale's neck. "The data stream is raw and uncompressed. I will monitor your vitals, but you have to fight to stay awake. If you slip into shock, I will have to sever the connection, and we might permanently damage your cerebral cortex." "Do it!" Vale commanded, bracing her hands firmly against the cold stone floor. Emily flipped the primary breaker. The monolith flared violently. Vale arched her back, letting out a raw, agonizing scream that echoed relentlessly through the ancient sanctuary. Every nerve in her body ignited as thousands of years of suppressed data flooded her consciousness. Her heart rate monitor shrieked, the numbers climbing dangerously high. "Stay with me!" Emily shouted, pressing a portable cardiac stimulator against the alien woman's chest. She delivered measured electrical pulses to stabilize Vale's wildly erratic heartbeat. "Focus on my voice. You are stronger than the pain. Do not let it consume you." Vale gripped Emily's forearm with crushing force, her silver eyes wide and burning with overloading energy. The human engineer did not flinch, pouring every ounce of her stubborn resolve into keeping the alien woman tethered to the waking world. Suddenly, the blinding light stabilized, shifting into a highly detailed, three-dimensional holographic projection that enveloped them both. The archive spoke not in spoken words, but in overwhelming, undeniable truths projected directly into their minds. The true history of Sci-fi unfolded. They saw the golden age of the ancients, cut brutally short by the arrival of an anomaly from the deep cosmos. It was Kalen. He was not a rightful king, nor was he even a true Zephyrian. The holographic records revealed him as a massive sentient psychic parasite. Centuries ago, he had crashed onto the planet, burrowing into the minds of the ruling class, slowly rewriting their genetics to serve his insatiable hunger. The planetary psychic network was never a tool for unity or communication. It was a massive feeding tube. Kalen was draining the very life force of the planet and its inhabitants to sustain his own grotesque immortality. But the planet had fought back. Evolution always finds a way. Vale's genetic code was not a mutation or a tragic defect. The monolith displayed her DNA sequence, overlaid perfectly with the planet's core energetic signature. They were a 100% match. Vale was the planetary immune response. She was the singular natural antibody born specifically to reject, isolate, and destroy the alien parasite sitting on the throne. Kalen had known this all along. He had masked his terrifying realization under the guise of aristocratic purity, labeling her a biological failure to justify crippling her. He was terrified of her true potential. The projection faded, leaving Vale gasping for air, tears of profound realization streaming down her cheeks. The crushing weight of her entire existence had just been inverted. She was not the weak link. She was the ultimate cure. "He stole my life," Vale whispered, her voice trembling with a newly discovered righteous fury. "He crippled me to save himself." Emily looked at the ancient terminals, then down at the ruined heavy armor of the dead trackers she had hauled along, and finally at her own engineering tools. A dangerous, brilliant idea began to form in her mind. "He crippled your legs," Emily said, her tone sharp and calculating. "But your nervous system is generating more kinetic energy than a heavy cruiser. We just need to channel it." For the next 10 hours, Emily worked like a woman possessed. She stripped the titanium plating and hydraulic servos from the tracker armor, using the conductive gold vines from the ancient Sci-fi ruins. She fused the earth mechanics with the living bioluminescent circuitry of the archive. She was building a custom exoskeleton, a perfect hybrid of human resilience and ancient alien power. Sparks flew as Emily welded the final support strut along the spine of the metal harness. She carefully strapped the heavy reinforced rig onto Vale's legs and waist, connecting the primary conductive cables directly into the neural nodes at the back of Vale's neck. "The suit does not have an external battery," Emily explained, stepping back to wipe the dark grease from her forehead. "You are the battery. Push the energy down your spine. Command the metal." Vale closed her eyes. She reached deep into that well of kinetic power she had used to create the shield earlier. The ancient gold vines integrated into the armor flared with a brilliant, blinding blue light. The hydraulic servos hissed loudly, slowly. The heavy mechanical joints locked tightly into place. For the first time in her adult life, Vale rose from the ground. She stood towering over Emily, her posture rigid and magnificent. The exoskeleton whirred with immense, terrifying power, reacting to her every single thought with absolutely zero latency. She took a step forward, the heavy titanium boot cracking the solid stone floor beneath her. She was no longer a discarded princess. She was a weapon forged from the very soul of her world, and she was finally ready to hunt. The heavy titanium boots of the exoskeleton slammed into the stone floor, shattering a solid block of quartz into dust. Vale paced the ancient archive, her movements no longer hindered by the agonizing paralysis that had defined her entire existence. The bioluminescent energy, coursing through the mechanical struts, glowed with a fierce, violent blue light. She clenched her fists, the hydraulic servos whining in perfect synchronization with her rising fury. She was ready. The ancient memories unlocked in her mind fueled a burning, insatiable desire for revenge. She turned to the human engineer, her silver eyes blazing like newly born stars. "We leave for the capital immediately," Vale demanded, her voice echoing with absolute authority. "I will tear down the palace gates with my bare hands. I will rip that parasitic monster from the throne and make him feel the exact same helplessness he forced upon me for 30 years. Emily stood perfectly still, her arms crossed over her chest. She did not flinch at the overwhelming display of raw, unrestrained kinetic power. Instead, she shook her head firmly. "No, you will not," Emily replied, her voice cutting through the tension like a razor. "That is exactly what he wants you to do. Kalen has tens of thousands of elite guards wired directly into his hive mind. They will swarm you the second you step foot within 50 miles of the capital. It does not matter how much planetary energy you possess. You cannot fight a synchronized army of that size. A blind, angry assault is not justice. It is just a very loud, meaningless suicide." Vale stopped pacing, the hydraulic joints of her suit hissing aggressively. "So what is your brilliant human strategy? We hide in these caves for another 100 years while he drains my world dry?" "We do the exact opposite of hiding," Emily said, stepping forward. A dark, calculated smirk played on her lips. "We walk right up to the nearest border garrison and surrender." Vale stared at her as if she had completely lost her mind. "You want to hand us over to the butchers?" "I want a direct escort to the target," Emily clarified, tapping her temple. "Kalen is an arrogant tyrant. He just discovered his greatest threat is alive and armed. If we fight, he sends armies. But if we surrender, his massive ego will not let his grunts simply execute you in the dirt. He will want to make a public spectacle of your failure. He will drag us straight into the grand biological hall, right to his physical, vulnerable core, We bypassed the entire army by letting them carry us inside. It was an absolutely insane gamble, relying entirely on the predictable narcissism of a dictator. But Vale saw the cold, undeniable logic in the human's eyes. 2 hours later, they stood beneath the towering, ominous metal gates of Outpost Section 9, their hands raised. The garrison guards immediately swarmed them, stripping Emily of her heavy rifle and binding their wrists with thick magnetic restraints. They were shoved brutally into the cramped, dark hold of a high-speed prisoner transport ship. The engines roared to life, lifting the vessel toward the capital. Inside the dim, vibrating cabin, the heavy blast door hissed open. The commanding officer of the outpost, Lieutenant Silas, stepped inside. He was a tall, scarred Zypherian, wearing the dark crimson armor of the Inner Circle. To their surprise, he reached up and manually severed the audio and visual surveillance feeds in the cabin. The glowing red recording lights blinked off. Silas knelt in front of Vale, his expression urgent and conspiratorial. "Princess Vale," he whispered, his tone drastically different from the brutal barking of the guards outside. "You must listen to me quickly. There is a fractured alliance within the highborn elite. We know the terrible truth about Kalen. We know he is consuming the planet. We have been waiting for a symbol to rally behind. Let us help you. Tell me your tactical strike plan, and my loyalist will disable the palace energy grids the moment we land." For a fleeting second, hope flashed across Vale's face. The idea of allies within the heart of the enemy empire was incredibly tempting. She opened her mouth to speak, to tell him about the ancient archive and the kinetic core. "Say absolutely nothing," Emily interrupted sharply. Vale snapped her head toward the human. Silas glared at Emily, his hand dropping to the plasma pistol at his hip. But Emily was not looking at his weapon. Her sharp, analytical eyes were locked onto the bioneural port at the base of the lieutenant's neck. "Look at his eyes, Vale," Emily commanded softly. "The pupils are completely dilated despite the bright cabin lights. Look at the micro tremors in your jaw. And the neural port on his neck is glowing a sickly, pulsating violet, not the calm blue of an independent mind. He is not a rebel. There is no resistance. He is completely compromised." Vale squinted, recognizing the terrifying signs. Kalen was driving the lieutenant's body like a remote-controlled drone. The tyrant was trying to trick them into revealing their hand before they even reached the palace. Silas realized the deception had failed. A twisted, unnatural smile stretched across his face, his voice distorting into the deep, multi-layered resonance of Baron Kalen himself. "Clever little scavenger," the puppet hissed. Before Silas could draw his weapon, Emily lunged forward. She used the momentum of the moving ship to ram her shoulder into his chest, pinning him against the steel bulkhead. With her hands magnetically bound, she could not punch him. But she did not need to. Concealed perfectly between her bound fingers was a microscopic data spike she had salvaged from the ancient ruins. As their bodies collided, she drove the tiny metal spike directly into the secondary diagnostic port on the lieutenant's heavy chest armor. In less than 3 seconds, Emily uploaded a highly aggressive, chaotic Earth computer virus directly into the lieutenant's neural feedback loop. She had coded it specifically to remain entirely dormant, masking itself perfectly within the standard data traffic of the psychic network. Emily stepped back, letting the gasping lieutenant slide down the wall. The puppet master had no idea a digital time bomb was now ticking inside his own closed system. "Take us to the Baron," Emily said coldly, staring down at the manipulated soldier. "We are ready to see the throne." The transport ship banked sharply, plunging into the dark, towering heart of the capital city. The trap was finally set. But neither side truly knew who was holding the lethal trigger. The high-speed transport ship slammed onto the landing pad of the grand biological hall. The heavy doors hissed open, and brutal hands dragged Emily and Vale into the absolute heart of the tyrant's domain. The sheer scale of the hall was suffocating. It was not a throne room. It was a monumental, grotesque factory of stolen life. Massive pillars of dark, living tissue stretched into a vaulted ceiling that was lost in shadows. Suspended and translucent, viscous pods along the towering walls were tens of thousands of Exiferian citizens. Thick, pulsating cables burrowed directly into their spines, siphoning their glowing, ethereal life force, drop by agonizing drop. The harvested energy converged into a blinding, torrential river of light that flowed directly into the center of the room. There, sitting upon a throne woven from bone and dark metal, was Baron Kalen. He looked immaculate, wearing pristine white armor that contrasted sickeningly with the nightmare surrounding him. He did not look like a monster. He looked like a god, perfectly at peace, glutted on the souls of his own people. "My broken, defective daughter!" Kalen's voice boomed, resonating not just in the air, but violently inside their skulls. He did not move his lips. The psychic projection was deafening. "And her pathetic little earth scavenger. I have observed many foolish maneuvers in my centuries of rule, but delivering yourselves directly into the epicenter of my feeding grounds is a level of stupidity that defies all logic." Vale stood tall, her ancient kinetic exoskeleton humming defiantly. "We came to end your feast, parasite." Kalen threw his head back and let out a cold, synthetic laugh that echoed terribly through the cavernous hall. "End me. You are not a savior, Vale. You are the final course. I have felt the planetary resistance radiating from your mutated blood. I knew the world would eventually produce an antibody. That is why I kept you alive, crippled and contained, until I was ready to consume the core itself. By sacrificing you today, I will permanently sever the planet's immune response. Zypher will finally stop fighting and die quietly in my grasp." Kalen lazily raised one finger. The air in the hall suddenly warped and screamed. A crushing, localized gravitational energy field activated directly above Vale and Emily. Every single weapon strapped to Emily's belt was violently magnetically stripped away, flying across the room and shattering against the far wall. The sheer pressure slammed into Vale's shoulders, like a falling mountain. The alien woman roared in defiance, refusing to bow. The heavy titanium struts of her Earth-engineered exoskeleton groaned in terrifying protest. Sparks exploded from the hydraulic joints as Vale pushed upward against the invisible, crushing weight. But Kalen only smiled wider, increasing the output. A sickening crack echoed through the hall. The primary spinal support of Vale's armor began to fracture. She was forced down, inch by agonizing inch, until her heavy metal knees slammed brutally into the polished floor. Emily was forced onto her stomach beside Vale, her magnetic restraints digging painfully into her wrists. The pressure was making her vision blur, her lungs struggling to pull in air. Yet, despite the overwhelming display of godlike power, Emily slowly lifted her head. She looked up at the tyrant sitting on his throne, and she smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. "You talk too much," Emily gasped out, her voice barely a whisper, yet carrying an absolute, undeniable finality. Emily closed her eyes and sharply clicked her teeth together. The motion activated a microscopic cybernetic relay she had hidden beneath her back molar before they ever left the crystal caves. A silent, encrypted command signal pulsed outward, instantly connecting with the dormant Earth virus she had planted inside the lieutenant's armor hours ago. The virus had spent the entire journey quietly infecting the master's psychic network. Now, it executed its primary directive. It detonated. It was not a physical explosion. It was a massive, catastrophic digital electromagnetic pulse that ripped through the psychic suppression network, binding the minds of the Royal Army. In a single fraction of a second, the invisible chains holding the consciousness of tens of thousands of elite guards completely shattered. The oppressive silence of the Grand Biological Hall was instantly replaced by a chorus of confused, agonized gasps. All around the perimeter, The obsidian, armored guards dropped their weapons, clutching their heads as decades of false memories and forced loyalty evaporated. They remembered their true families. They remembered the pods. They looked up at the throne, and their confusion instantly transmuted into explosive, unadulterated rage. "Kill the parasite!" a guard screamed, picking up his heavy plasma rifle and firing directly at the throne. Absolute, unprecedented chaos erupted. The rebellion did not start as a slow movement. It exploded into a full-scale civil war inside the throne room. Thousands of awakened guards turned their weapons on the elite inner circle, who were still trying to protect the Baron. Laser fire crisscrossed the massive hall in a blinding storm of red and blue energy. Explosions rocked the foundations, shattering the dark tissue pillars and raining debris down upon the chaotic battlefield. Kalen shrieked, a horrific, metallic sound that sounded like tearing steel. The sudden loss of his massive psychic control network caused a violent biological backlash. His pristine white armor cracked and shattered from the inside out. His humanoid facade violently melted away, revealing the true, stomach-churning horror beneath. He was a colossal, biomechanical monstrosity. His body was a writhing mass of jagged black metal and pulsating, raw biological cables. Huge, scythe-like appendages erupted from his back. Realizing his network was failing, the monster panicked. He lashed out with his massive tendrils, impaling his own remaining loyal guards. He violently absorbed their raw biomass, rapidly expanding in size and horrifying power. His multifaceted, glowing red eyes locked onto the one person responsible for this catastrophic failure. He completely ignored the army shooting at him. He lunged off the ruined throne, his massive scythes tearing up the floor as he charged forward with terrifying speed. Determined to crush the human engineer into paste, Emily could not move. The gravitational field was still active, and she was bound. The monstrous shadow of the true Baron loomed over her, bringing down a massive, bladed limb meant to split her in half. "No!" Vale's voice cut through the deafening roar of the battle. The sight of Emily about to die triggered something ancient and absolute deep within Vale's genetic code. The planetary antibody did not just awaken. It went supernova. A blinding, pure silver light erupted from her very pores, completely burning away the cracking titanium exoskeleton. She did not need the metal anymore. The kinetic energy violently shattered the oppressive gravity field like brittle glass, moving faster than the human eye could track. Vale launched herself directly into the path of the falling scythe. She raised her bare hands. The massive, heavy blade of the biomechanical monster slammed into her palms. The sheer kinetic shockwave of the impact blew every combatant within 100 feet clean off their feet. Vale stood her ground, her feet sinking deep into the shattered floor. She was holding back a creature the size of a building with raw, concentrated planetary energy. She looked over her shoulder at Emily, her silver eyes burning with the furious, undeniable power of an entire world. "Get up, Emily!" Vale commanded, her voice harmonizing with the ancient frequency of the planet itself. She forcefully shoved the massive scythe upward, throwing the colossal beast off balance with a roar of pure power. Vale generated a focused, spear-like beam of kinetic light from her hands, blasting a massive, smoking hole straight through the monster's front defensive plating. "The path is open!" Vale shouted, stepping forward into the breach. "Let us finish this!" Vale and Emily plunged through the smoking breach, descending into the absolute depths of the fortress. They entered the psychic core, a massive subterranean chamber where Kalen kept his true parasitic heart. The air here was incredibly thick, suffocating with the stolen consciousness of billions. The walls pulsed with a sickly, corrupted violet light. In the center, Kalen's massive biomechanical form regenerated, sealing the massive wound Vale had just inflicted. He towered over them, his physical form now fully synchronized with the twisted psychic storm swirling around them. He knew physical force alone could not defeat the planetary antibody. So he shifted his tactics to the battlefield, where he reigned supreme. He attacked her mind. A terrifying wave of telepathic energy slammed into Vale. The physical world vanished. She was instantly transported back to her darkest memories. She found herself lying on the cold, sterile floor of the Royal Medical Wing, staring at her motionless legs. The terrifying, multi-layered voice of her father echoed from the shadows, dripping with absolute contempt. He called her scrap. He called her a genetic dead end, a useless burden, a creature devoid of purpose or grace. The illusions were flawlessly real. Vale felt the phantom weight of her paralysis returning, the crushing despair pulling her down into the endless dark. She dropped to her knees in the real world, the brilliant silver light fading from her hands as her immense kinetic power faltered under the unbearable weight of her past trauma. Emily saw the alien woman collapsing and instantly recognized the signs of a catastrophic psychic assault. She could not fight the illusions directly, but she could anchor her friend. Emily sprinted through the blinding storm of violet energy, throwing herself onto the ground beside Vale. She grabbed Vale by the shoulders, shaking her fiercely. "Vale, listen to my voice!" Emily shouted over the roaring telepathic wind. "He is trying to make you fight him with anger. He feeds on conflict. Stop fighting the visions. Remember what saved you in the first place." Vale gasped for air, her silver eyes rolling back as Kaelin flooded her mind with images of her crawling desperately through the scorching red sand. "Your paralysis was your shield," Emily yelled, her voice steady and piercing. "Your mind survived his control by shutting down the pathways. Do not strike back. Embrace the absolute stillness. Let the silence be your fortress." The words cut through the suffocating darkness of the illusion. Vale stopped struggling against the phantom weight. She stopped trying to force her mind to attack. Instead, she took a slow, deep breath and let go. She sank into the profound, absolute stillness that had defined her existence for 30 years. She embraced the quiet void inside her mind, the impenetrable firewall she had unknowingly built to protect her soul. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. The violent psychic storm Kaelin unleashed crashed into Vale and simply vanished. Her mind was a bottomless ocean, absorbing his furious telepathic strikes without a single ripple. Vale opened her eyes, and the silver light returned. Not chaotic or violent, but impossibly calm and solid. She finally understood her true worth. Her value never came from physical perfection or royal lineage. She was the immovable fulcrum, the solitary point of absolute stillness required to break the tyrant and return free will to an entire species. Kaelin shrieked in genuine terror as his mental domination completely failed. Desperate, he channeled all his remaining stolen energy into a thick, impenetrable kinetic barrier around his biomechanical core, preparing to fire a massive plasma barrage to obliterate the chamber entirely. "Now, Emily!" Vale commanded, her voice ringing with absolute clarity. Emily did not hesitate. She reached to the back of her belt, pulling the heavy, customized electromagnetic pulse grenade she had assembled in the ancient crystal caves. She armed the charge and threw it with every ounce of strength she possessed. The human weapon sailed perfectly through the air, detonating mere inches from Kaelin's glowing shield. The resulting blue shockwave brutally disrupted the alien frequency, violently short-circuiting his final line of defense for exactly 1 second. It was all Vale needed. She lunged forward, her body moving faster than thought. The silver energy concentrated entirely into her right hand, shaping itself into a flawless, blinding spear of pure planetary light. She drove the spear directly into the exposed, pulsating heart of the parasite. Time seemed to stop. Kaelin let out a final, agonizing roar that shook the very foundations of the capital. The pure planetary energy injected directly into his core violently rejected his parasitic biology. His massive biomechanical body cracked, turning to brittle ash from the inside out, before finally shattering into a billion pieces of lifeless dust. The tyrant was dead. As his core collapsed, it released all the stolen life force he had hoarded for centuries. A colossal, magnificent wave of warm, healing golden light erupted from the chamber, exploding upward through the palace and washing over the entire planet. The citizens suspended in the agonizing pods were gently lowered to the ground, their minds finally their own. The deep wounds of the world began to knit together. Hours later, the dust settled in the ruined Grand Hall. The surviving nobility and the newly liberated guards gathered, dropping to their knees in absolute reverence. They bowed their heads to Vial, offering her the supreme throne, begging their savior to lead them into a new era. Vial looked at the empty, shattered throne, and then she turned to look at the human engineer standing quietly by her side. Vial gently shook her head. She refused the crown. She had spent her entire life trapped by the expectations of the royal court, and she had no intention of wearing another set of chains, no matter how beautiful they were. Instead, she walked away from the throne room. Together, Vale and Emily boarded a sleek, heavily modified exploration ship. They left the healing world of Sci-fi behind, soaring up into the endless, star-filled sky. They were not ruler and subject, nor savior and scavenger. They were simply two equal friends, ready to explore the vast, unknown systems of the galaxy on their own terms. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Sci-fi stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.